There are few hours in life more agreeable than the hour dedicated to the ceremony of afternoon tea. Henry James, an American author. Today, everyone can afford the pleasure of drinking a cup of tea, but this wasn't always the case. Until the late 19th century, tea was a privilege that cost as much as 50 cents per pound, $1 per kilogram. For reference, a 2-story villa could be built for $500 at the time. That's why we decided to dedicate this video to the man who made this luxury item easily accessible. We're going to tell you his story, from when he crossed the Atlantic Ocean as a young man looking for a job, to how this entrepreneur became a household name associated with tea. Watch this video and you'll know how a circus elephant, the biggest cheese, and the very first World Cup contributed to his success. Childhood. Thomas Johnstone Lipton was born in 1850 in Glasgow, Scotland. The youngest of 5, he was the last hope of his parents who were getting on in years. The first 2 children died in infancy, and the health of the other 2 deeply concerned his parents. Who, if not Tommy, would help them in their small grocery store? He was as young as 5 when he started to learn the ropes of trading. Although the tiny store couldn't fit more than 5 customers at a time, there was enough work for everybody. And when his brother and sister died, little Tom then wasn't even 10, school was off the table. Despite his young age, Thomas helped his parents a great deal and became a credit to the family business. Things were looking up, and the family started thinking about opening a larger store. But Tom aspired to something bigger, and spending the rest of his life in his parents' store just wouldn't do it for him. He dreamed of something more interesting than being a small grocer. Around his native Glasgow, some of the largest shipyards were found. From there, ships full of cargo and passengers departed for America. Every day, while smiling politely at customers, Tom couldn't help thinking about the breathtaking experiences that the New World had in store for the lucky travelers across the Atlantic. Chasing the American Dream. When Thomas turned 14, he signed up as a cabin boy on a ship running between Glasgow and Belfast, a turning point in his life. 1 year later, in 1865, with just $8 in his pocket, Lipton took a steamer bound for the U.S. During his first 3 years there, Thomas traveled across the West looking for work. The recent Civil War had plunged the entire country into a deep economic depression. To survive, Lipton had to take on any work he could find, from growing rice in South Carolina to rolling tobacco leaves in Virginia. As luck would have it, however, Lipton did end up a grocer. In 1868, he got a job as a grocer assistant in New York. Being a cog in the huge trading machine, Lipton could have a closer look at its finely tuned structure, where every detail was carefully thought out. The placement of goods on the shelves, the communication techniques used with customers, and the motto, "In God we trust, all others pay cash," that Thomas had never forgotten. The first part of the motto appears on all American currency since the mid-19th century. Lipton's work there changed the way he saw things, and from then on, grocery businesses seemed less like a daunting prospect and more like a promising opportunity. First business. After 6 years of living in the U.S., the 21-year-old Thomas comes back to his native Glasgow. With the 100 pounds he managed to save, and more importantly the skill and know-how, he opens his first grocery store. At first, Lipton had to both manage the store, sell goods, get supplies, work behind the counter, and run the errands all by himself. He would wheel the cart with goods from the docks, deliver purchases to the clients, pay visits to his suppliers, all while thinking about the ways of attracting new clients and turning them into loyal customers after their very first visit. At this point, he knew he could use some advertising. He knew of its potential from working in the U.S., but he didn't have enough money. Lipton was dead set on not raising the prices in his store, even if it meant having to run from one farm to another to buy directly from manufacturers. Working on a shoestring budget, Lipton had to draw on his skills and creativity. He put thought into how he displayed his products, had the windows whimsically painted, and changed welcome signs on a weekly basis, which came courtesy of Willie Lockhart, a cartoonist he had hired. And it worked. People would crowd around the store all day and even at night when the windows were illuminated by gas burners. Advertising, key to success. Before long, Thomas was the owner of 20 stores in the west of Scotland. They were painted in bright colors and stood out against those of his competitors. Lipton knew that his business relied upon regular supplies of high-quality products, but most of them were imported. It made Lipton dependent on foreign suppliers, and it was a concern. That's why he went to County Fermanagh, where he started hiring locals so they could meet farmers and sign supplier contracts with them before their products reached the market. This approach was a revolutionary, never-seen-before way of doing business. But Thomas Lipton didn't forget that the engine of commerce was advertising. As already mentioned, Lipton had a cartoonist draw funny pictures on his store windows, but with time his plans grew more ambitious. On a day in December 1881, a steamer arrived at the port of Glasgow with an unusual cargo from the U.S., a cheese belonging to none other than Thomas Lipton. It's said to have been the largest cheese in the world, over 60 centimeters thick and with 6 meters in circumference. At first, the businessman brought it to one of his stores, but it couldn't fit through the front door. Lipton then had to go to another store where his cheese was displayed in the store window. For 2 weeks, people crowded at the store to have a glimpse of Jumbo, as the cheese was nicknamed. A few days before Christmas, dressed in a white suit, Thomas Lipton started cutting up the cheese, which was sold out in 2 hours. From then on, Lipton's giant cheeses were regular pre-Christmas attractions. At some point, a circus elephant was even hired just to get one of them into the store. Tea to the people. In the 1880s, Thomas Lipton's chain comprised 200 stores. The businessman himself now participated less in day-to-day management and dedicated his time to traveling in search of new products to put on the shelves. In 1890, Thomas Lipton entered the tea trade. The timing was opportune, as coffee, the only drink that could compete with tea, was in short supply due to a widespread epidemic of coffee rust in Ceylon. Most coffee plantations on the island were auctioned off or replanted with tea trees. Land prices plummeted to unprecedented levels, and that's when Lipton put his entrepreneurial skills to work. He bought 5 tea plantations with a total area of 5,500 acres in Ceylon, where he went under the pretext of opening new stores in Australia to avoid the unwelcome attention of his competitors. Lipton employed the best war strategies in conquering the tea market. He turned his plantations into a testing ground for the latest technological ideas. When he realized that transporting tea leaves to the processing points was too time-consuming, he introduced an innovative cable car system. He even had his own fleet. At first, there were clippers and sailboats reaching speeds incredible for that time. Later on, there were also steamers with a greater capacity and less dependent on the weather. An authentic parade with a Sinhalese orchestra would welcome ships with tea as they arrived and unloaded. Flamboyant musicians and dancers followed the boxes of tea while playing exotic instruments. Some may say it's a little over the top, but as Henry Ford said, stopping advertising to save money is like stopping your watch to save time. Lipton never lost sight of his goal: keep the price low and the quality high. His slogan, "Direct from the tea garden to the teapot," would grace every poster that was put in British trains and buses. Having his own plantations, he didn't need any middlemen, which made Lipton's tea way cheaper than others. But there was a problem. Since the time when tea had been mixed with sheep dung, cheap tea had gained a nasty reputation. To fix this, Lipton started offering tea in bags of 1 pound, half a pound, and a quarter pound. At the time, tea was sold in boxes that the customers couldn't open before the purchase. So there was no way for clients to know if the product was fresh and how much of it there was. Lipton was also the first to put tea in smaller packages. Apart from the unique size, he came up with a bright and memorable design. His clients loved it and paid regular visits to Lipton stores. Lipton used his name for his store chain, but in just a few years, he made it synonymous with tea. If grocery stores made Lipton a millionaire, the tea business made him a multimillionaire. Queen Victoria developed quite a liking for his tea and knighted Thomas Lipton in 1897 for his contribution to the English way of life. Here's another interesting fact. Being a big soccer fan, Sir Thomas organized a tournament in 1909 in Turin that later would be called the First World Cup. Italy, Germany, and Switzerland sent their most prestigious professional clubs, while the Football Association of England declined the offer. Knowing it would be a serious loss not to have England in the tournament, Lipton invited West Auckland, an amateur club from the northwest of the country. Most players there were coal miners, but even so, their team became the winners. When speaking of Lipton, it's also worth mentioning an American merchant by the name of Thomas Sullivan. Sullivan figured that selling tea in smaller packages would eventually become more lucrative. So in 1904, he came up with the idea of selling tea in hand-sewn silk bags. It was right on the money. Restaurant owners liked this novelty. There used to be too much mess from the tea leaves in the kitchen, while silk bags were much easier to handle. Tea could be brewed without even undoing them. The new idea quickly spread. In New York, restaurants, cafes, and tea houses now brewed tea in small bags, but instead of silk, they were made of gauze, which was cheaper. 10 years after the first silk bag found its customer, tea bags went far beyond restaurant kitchens. Many merchants realized that selling tea in disposable bags was good business, so they started turning to packaging equipment. In 1914, Europe could really appreciate the practicality of tea bags that really came through for soldiers fighting during the First World War. This is how the tea bag started its rapid, triumphant march across the world. Today, it would be quite a challenge to find someone who's never made any tea with a tea bag. And even though an overly discerning critic will deem this tea too commercial, let critics do their criticizing. That's what they're here for, after all.